our speaker today.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Wasn't that some good food? Yeah, good stuff. Let's show our appreciation to the cooks. Well, it's a privilege to be part of the chamber. You know, Insperity's mission is to help businesses succeed so that communities prosper, and that's what we live to do. That's what we strive to do. So we're proud to be part of the chamber, and it's a blessing to be here. Some of you may know about Insperity. Used to be admin staff, same leadership, same company. We just expanded our service offering, and you know, right down the street here on 59. There's some brochures that were distributed. You probably found one at your seat, and it outlines Insperity's services along with Growth Force. Growth Force is a company here in Kingwood also, and while we provide the HR outsource solution and support for small to mid-sized businesses, Growth Force helps with the financial aspect. So take a look through the brochure. You'll see some reporting. There's financial reporting that they produce and some management accounting. If you have a service-based business or you deal with clients, this is a powerful solution. It works with QuickBooks if you're on QuickBooks, but it'll help you understand which projects are most profitable for you, which clients are most profitable for you, what teams of employees you have are most profitable, down to the employee level. So these financial numbers and metrics really help business owners drive their business. Because at the end of the day, you're in business to make money, right? So if you're looking for some help in any of these areas, flip through this brochure. Our cards are attached here. Mine and also Taylor, who's right over here. Taylor, want to raise your hand for a second? We'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have. And with that, I'd like to introduce our Congressman Ted Poe. He was elected to the House of Representatives in 2004 to represent the second Congressional District. He brings a no-nonsense approach and style to Washington, D.C. The Congressman serves on the House Judiciary Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee as the chairman of the Subcommittee on Terrorism, Non-Proliferation, and Trade. He's an outspoken advocate on border security. He travels regularly to the border to meet with law enforcement there and the residents. And he also visits our troops in Afghanistan and around the world. So with that, will you please join me in welcoming Congressman.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark. Thanks for that introduction. Linda, thank you for hosting us today, and I'm glad to be back in Texas. I just got in about an hour and a half ago from Washington, D.C., and this is called the summer recess, where most members spend some time in their congressional districts. I'll give you a little bit of a tip, a stock tip. If you notice, every August, when the Congress goes out of session, the stock market goes up. You can check me on that, but just about every August it goes up when we're not in session. But I come back to Texas every weekend when we are in session, and I want to cover some things and then get questions from you and probably comments, knowing y'all, you have an opinion or two about what's going on. When people think of Congress, most folks don't get warm fuzzies inside and get all excited. But there are some things going on, and I'd like to go over a few of those with you in the few minutes that we have today. As Mark mentioned, I am on Foreign Affairs Committee, and the reason is not because Texas borders Louisiana, although that's a good enough reason, that other international border that we have. But I'm chairman of the subcommittee called Terrorism, Non-Proliferation, and Trade. Strange bedfellows, but we call it the T&T Committee, Terrorism, Non-Proliferation, and Trade. And all of those issues are taking place now in Washington, and we're dealing with all of those. Terrorism, non-proliferation, that's with Iran, North Korea, and of course trade. So I'll work in reverse order and talk about each one of those. Trade is something that really doesn't get much play, but let's put it in perspective with our community. Houston, Texas is the #1 export city in the United States. 50% of the Houston area economy, 50%, comes out of the Port of Houston, is based on the Port of Houston. We are an export port. We send stuff all over the world, unlike other ports in the country, like the West Coast. Those are import ports, but we export it. Now, I won't give you a lot of statistics, but I'll give you one more. 50% of that half is based upon energy exports. And I'm not talking about fuel. I'm talking about little parts that go all over the world to make oil and gas rigs, machinery, drilling rigs, and they're made from area, really small manufacturing companies. I call them mom and pop places. 50% of our economy is on the Port of Houston. We're an export port, and 50% of that has to do with trading our stuff all over the world. Which brings us to something that is taking place right now. The House of Representatives and the Senate passed the Trade Promotion Authority. What is that thing? Well, this is the 18th one in our history. And what that does, it gives the President the authority to negotiate trade agreements with foreign countries. That's what this did. And in this agreement, which I voted for and totally supported, we outlined 150 requirements that we want in any trade deal that we make with Southeast Asia, with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. 11 countries, we're one of them. One of the biggest agreements ever that we've participated in, where 11 countries worked together to drop trade barriers so we could trade stuff back and forth with each other. 150 requirements. So that's being taking place right now. That is good for Texas, because you see 95% of the world's consumers and customers are not in the United States. They're all over the world. So we want to be able to export things that we manufacture here to different countries. The Trade Promotion Authority gives the President, as it has other presidents, the permission to negotiate on behalf of the United States. Some of those countries are on board, some of them aren't. The United States hasn't come up with the agreement yet. We haven't seen it. We will vote on it in the House of Representatives, up or down, when that comes. But trade is vital to our economy, the Houston area economy. Myself and Janice Hahn. Janice Hahn is a Democrat from California, and I just mentioned that because this is a bipartisan issue. Things in Congress that actually are, to me, are important, that work, are bipartisan. And she and I are the co-chairs of the Ports Caucus. She represents Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach, and I represent, the ports here in the Houston area. And it's 82 members of Congress, and we are doing everything we can to promote the ports. I know this isn't something that's real sexy, but it's important to trade in our economy. One of the issues with the ports is the Harbor Maintenance Fund. What in the world is that? Customers who use the ports pay into a fund. The fund goes to Washington. That's the problem. The fund goes to Washington, and then the Washington bureaucrats distribute that money back to the ports for maintenance. The Harbor Maintenance Fund. Here's the problem. What goes in the fund doesn't always come out of the fund. Customers send their money up to Washington, and the money doesn't get sent back to any place. It stays in Washington up there. We don't know where. And the problem with that is our ports need the money to maintain the harbors, especially the Port of Houston. We've got one that silts. We don't have a rock bottom. We have to constantly drain it or dredge it. So, as easy as this sounds, we have passed or we have filed legislation to require the government to give back the money to the ports that send it to Washington, D.C. It seems logical, but we haven't gotten a vote on that yet. We hope we can do that. Whatever goes up, just a little of it comes back. And so our bill says, basically, when you get the money, you send it back to the ports the next year and you spend all of it. See, remember, this is not taxpayer money we're talking about. We're talking about money that's spent by people in the ports. So we're working on trying to make our ports more viable, especially our export ports, and that is one of the things that we are working on as well. But trade is important to the Houston economy. One of the issues that came up that has not been reauthorized is the Ex-Im Bank. What the Ex-Im Bank does is provide loans for businesses that really operate in other areas of the world where normal banking procedures would not give them a loan. That was not reauthorized. The Ex-Im Bank may be reauthorized when we get back in September. I don't know. But I will say this. Guess which city has more Ex-Im Bank loans than any other city in the United States? Houston, Texas. And there's not, we're not talking about big companies. We're talking about small companies. And so Ex-Im Bank is vital to the small manufacturers here in the Houston area. It was not reauthorized. I don't know if it will be or not. You just have to wait and see. Let me talk about something else. Move on to something a little more volatile. The policy of the United States for years was this, that Iran would never have nuclear weapons, period. That was our foreign policy with Iran. Why? Because those folks are dangerous. They really are. And when the Ayatollah says death to America, he means it. This is not rhetoric. He means it. So, the United States imposed sanctions along with other countries in the West on Iran to keep them from developing nuclear weapons. The sanctions were working. Iran decided they would negotiate out of the sanctions. So, the West and Iran had been working on an agreement for several years, and the agreement now before us is this, that Iran will be allowed to have and authorized by the world to have nuclear weapons in 10 years. That's not all. In 5 years, the embargo against conventional weapons being shipped into Iran will be lifted. What do you mean? Conventional weapons, non-nuclear. They get those primarily from Russia. That embargo will be lifted in 5 years. In 8 years, the prohibition of developing intercontinental ballistic missiles will be lifted. So 5 years, conventional weapons, 8 years, intercontinental ballistic missiles, 10 years, 11 years, they'll be legally, under the world powers, authorized to develop nuclear weapons. Now that's part of the deal, and I've read this agreement. We've had numerous hearings on this. We had a hearing in our Foreign Affairs Committee. Secretary Kerry spent the whole day testifying before our Foreign Affairs Committee because we have jurisdiction over approving this agreement or not approving this agreement. And he testified, he gave his opinion about why we should sign this thing and why it is good for us. I'll tell you up front, I am not going to vote to support this deal. And the more we read about it, the worse it gets. For example, to give you an example, we're going to lift, the sanctions will be lifted. Part of those sanctions include two things. One, the sanction against them selling their crude oil to other countries. Now, I asked John Kerry this question. I said, I understand that we're going to lift the sanctions on them exporting their crude oil. Yes. But yet in Texas, we cannot export our crude oil. That's right. No, we can't. We can't export our crude oil. We've been trying to export our crude oil, and let's get in the weeds. There's two types of crude oil. There's heavy crude, and there's Texas sweet crude. That's what it's called, Texas sweet crude. We use heavy crude in our refineries. We do not use sweet crude. Why not? It would take 5 years to retrofit these refineries. So we don't do that. So we have an abundance of sweet crude in Texas. And it's all because Texas oil folks know how to get that sweet crude out of the ground. So we got an abundance of it. What do we want to do with it? We want to sell it. You know, we want to follow the Bluebell ice cream philosophy. You know, their philosophy is eat all you can, sell the rest. We want to use all we can and sell the rest of sweet crude. But we cannot do it because the law won't let us do it. So I told John Kerry that, look, we want the same deal in Texas that you're giving the Iranians. We want the sanctions lifted against us if you're going to lift the sanctions against the Iranians on exporting crude oil. He didn't think that was funny. And then I threw in, I said, I'll make another agreement with you. We promise not to ever develop nuclear weapons in Texas. So anyway, conversation went downhill after that. But I got a problem with that. Their economy is an oil-based economy. So we have them, you know, in a situation where the sanctions are working. It's crippling the economy. The goal, cripple the economy. The people of Iran will change their government. That's the goal because the economy's so bad. But now we lift those sanctions. They get ready to sell crude oil. We can't sell crude oil. I don't like that at all. And many other people don't like it as well. Also, we're giving them anywhere between $50 and $150 billion immediately. Now, what they do with that, I don't think their intentions are going to be real good. Iran is the #1 country in the world for being a state sponsor of terrorism. That means they use money to funnel it to other people in the world, on every continent except Australia, that are terrorists. That's why they are the #1 state sponsor of terror in the world. Now, I think some of that money is going to end up in the hands of folks that don't really want to be nice. They're terrorists. See? And why are we giving them that money? Why are we not holding on that money? Now, some of you may have been aware of this. Over the years, people who have been killed primarily because of the Iranian regime have filed lawsuits in the United States to get a judgment against the Iranian government because their loved one was killed in a terrorist act or Iran was responsible for that. And it goes back years and years. It should have been part of the agreement that that money first would go to those folks in the United States who have won judgments against Iran before we give that money back to them and they're giving it to terrorist groups. At least that's what I think. So every day we post something on our Facebook about what's in the Iranian deal. And you're welcome to read the Iranian deal. There's another part of the deal that no one has seen yet that they have made an agreement with, the IAEA, that's a separate agreement that we haven't seen. I think members of Congress need to see that before we agree, before we even vote on whether we want to approve the Iranian agreement or not. So I think we need to go back to the negotiating table. That's the answer, is not to approve the deal and then go back to the negotiating table and get something that's better for the United States rather than to approve this. Because, you know, 10 years may not seem like a lot to you, but in 10 years we're going to let them have nuclear weapons. Now, why intercontinental ballistic missiles? Why is that even in the mix? See, you don't need intercontinental ballistic missiles to destroy Israel. They've already got missiles that'll go to Israel. As Prime Minister Netanyahu told us, they only need those new ICBMs to carry nuclear weapons across the pond, so to speak, to the United States and to Western Europe. Why are they developing those nuclear weapons? They don't need them for anything in the Middle East. So, because the Ayatollah made the comment that America needs to be destroyed. I believe him when he says that. And so this deal is a bad deal for the United States. It's not going to make the world safer. And what's occurring, they get nuclear weapons. I'm talking too long. Thank you, Kim. I'll move along. Play it out. North Korea already has nuclear weapons. North Korea and Iran working together, two kind of rogue empires, countries working together, And we know they're working together. Now you'll have 2 of them with nuclear weapons. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt will get nuclear weapons within a matter of short time if Iran is allowed to get nuclear weapons. They need that for the balance of power in the Middle East. So now we're going to have more countries with nuclear weapons. Lovely. So we need to not approve the deal, have our State Department go back and say, look, we're going to work out something else that Congress will approve. The other issue that I wanted to mention, I guess very quickly now, is I have 5 minutes before I have to stop. Okay, Kim, I will. We have this group called ISIS. You may have heard of them. ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. Notice the Islamic State. That is their basis. They exist based upon their interpretation of radical Islam. And they're doing a lot of bad things all over the world. Not just beheadings, but kidnappings, sexual assault, everything. They are a foreign terrorist organization, and the United States has not yet made a decision how we're going to deal with them. The policy of our administration, and this has nothing to do about the president, it's about the policy, has been to take so-called moderate rebels in Syria. Now, the issue, moderate, who's going to decide if this person's a moderate or not? But anyway, what's a moderate rebel today is an ISIS member tomorrow, in my opinion. Take them and train them in Saudi Arabia, 5,000 of them, train them, send them back to Syria to fight ISIS. That was the plan. It's over a year old. There have been, I believe, 60 of those 5,000 that have been trained. And when they went back into Syria on the first week or so that they were deployed, 12 of them were captured by ISIS. Now, that's the plan along with a few aerial strikes. The United States has to make this decision, and I've introduced legislation that we have to make this decision. If ISIS is a national security threat to the United States, if it is, then we need to go after them. If they're not, then that's another issue. But we haven't made that decision yet. We have not said as a nation that ISIS is a national security threat to the United States. Let's make that decision. Congress needs to get on the House floor and debate that issue. And if they're a national security threat to the United States, then we need to deal with them as a national security threat, wherever they are. And they're only growing. Now, that, as you probably have read, they're in North Africa and Libya. Libya may fall into the hands of ISIS because no one is stopping them. They do horrible things to people who do not agree with them. And it's not just Christians and Jews. It's other Muslims that do not agree with them. They go into an area, unless you agree with them, you're either executed or you pay a tax or you're converted to them. That's their 3 remedies. So we have to make a decision. And ISIS, once again, if you look at my Facebook, if you really have no life, if you look at my Facebook every day, I do a terrorist update. Some terrorist activity taking place somewhere in the world that you probably have not read about that is going on. They are determined individuals. They have, and either we stop them or we don't stop them. But we need a plan. Not making a decision is not the answer. My opinion is, United States is a world leader. We need to lead. And we need to lead in threats like ISIS because it doesn't just affect us. It affects really every country on earth that's trying to live in a civilized way. Yemen now is falling into the hands of civil war. Libya, numerous groups trying to take over Libya. And of course you know about ISIS or about Syria and the chaos that's taking place there. Thousands of people are fleeing their homelands because of ISIS. I was in Turkey last year and visited with a group of refugees on the Turkish-Syrian border. 150,000 people were in this one refugee camp. And they're in Jordan, There are numerous places throughout the Middle East. They're all fleeing this evil of ISIS. Is the United States going to just let them play it out, or are we going to get involved? That's a decision Congress ought to make, and ought to make fast. Okay, I will talk forever, but I will not, because I've been told not to. What's on your mind? Questions, comments? Okay. Okay, I will. Thank you. Once again, I want to mention something that's bipartisan. And Congress passed legislation dealing with human sex trafficking, primarily of minors, this year. And in the House, Carolyn Maloney and I were the sponsors of the legislation. Carolyn Maloney, she is a New York liberal Democrat. And she teamed up with a sort of conservative Republican Texan, and we got together and sponsored this human trafficking legislation. So that's about as bipartisan as you can get. Carolyn Maloney and me, I mean, we don't even speak the same language, you know. We're separated by a common language, as Churchill used to say. She's a wonderful person, wonderful lady. And this legislation is the most major legislation that has passed on this issue ever. We took 11 bills in the House, passed them, sent them to the Senate. They passed out one bill, came out, and the President signed it into law last month. What does it do? It does basically three things. It goes after the trafficker. That's the slave trader, the person who smuggles kids into the United States, the person who sells kids in the United States, domestic trafficking. It's about 75% domestic, 25% coming in south of the border. Primarily young girls. Average age, anybody know? 13. 13 or 14, average age. So it goes after that individual. It also then takes the other end, which is the victim, the child primarily. It's not all children. Some of them are adult women. But it takes the child and treats the child as a victim of crime and not a criminal. For years, children were picked up on the street, charged with child prostitution. A child cannot commit prostitution. Legally, they cannot. They cannot consent even. But that's how they were treated, as criminals, put in the juvenile justice system. Usually they get out and they go back to what they were doing. But now we take them and treat them as victims of crime, which they are victims of criminal conduct. And make sure that they have resources, and I'll tell you how we do that in just a minute. Give you one statistic. There are about 3,000 animal shelters in the United States, and we need every one of them. You know, I have 3 Dalmatians. I call them the weapons of mass destruction. And I got one of them from a Dalmatian rescue in Dallas. See, 3,000 animal shelters. There are about 300 beds for minors that are trafficked in sex trafficking. 300 beds. So the legislation covers that too. But the main thing it does, or the second thing it does, it goes after the demand. The person, the consumer, the individual that pays to have this service and treats them like a criminal because they are child abusers. They are not, you know, as some people call them, they're not Johns, they're child abusers, okay? So it goes after all three of those. It goes after the trafficker, treats the victim like a victim, and goes after the demand. And then the fourth thing that this bill does, it allows mandatory fines that are imposed on the trafficker and the demand, including the jail time. Those fines go into a fund. That fund then goes to victim services for the victims who have been trafficked. Gives them shelters, gives police training, etc. And that's what that legislation does. It passed the House with 3 no votes, so it's 430. I think there were 430 votes, 3 against, and in the Senate it passed unanimously, and the President signed it. Great piece of legislation, and so we should be, you probably didn't hear much about it because it was bipartisan. We weren't fighting. We were getting along, I mean, and trying to do something that's good for the country. Let me stop there and see if you have some questions. Yes? What the Department of Labor is considering doing with the retirement accounts? They haven't made up their mind what they want to do with the retirement accounts, but it would take an act of Congress for there to be any change from the Department of Labor, in my opinion. So, what about the minimum wage? Well, the minimum wage will come up for a vote in the House and the Senate. If it comes up, I don't know what's going to happen. I suspect it probably will not pass. I mean, the statistics show that you raise the minimum wage, you really do not, you don't make any, it's not successful for the purposes that it's intended for. So I don't know if minimum wage is going to pay. I'm not familiar with what you're talking about then, Charlie. Okay. Okay, well, let's talk about it then, because I'm not familiar with it. Other questions? Yes, Tony. That's really all you came to hear was what I thought about Donald Trump. I don't know how it's going to play out, but I will say this. This is my opinion. Donald Trump appeals to a lot of people because so many people are frustrated with everything that's taking place in Washington. And so he appeals to people for that reason. Bernie Sanders on the Democrat side is exactly the same way. I mean, he's polling very well. He is an avowed socialist, but he's not the establishment. And that's why people on the left are supporting him for the same reason, because they're so frustrated with what they see in Washington, D.C. But it's going to be an interesting campaign. He has the Trump card, so to speak, and the whole deal. I do not know what's going to take place, and I have not picked somebody yet. Anybody else have a question? Yes. On immigration? Nothing's going to happen on immigration. If you're asking what we're going to do, I don't see anything happening on immigration at all, because any leadership doesn't want to do anything with it because they don't think the president will approve any immigration bill that is passed out of the House and the Senate. So nothing's going to happen. I think that's a mistake. I think we should move forward and pass legislation and deal with the issue of immigration. Republicans are in charge. That means we should take leadership positions on every issue. We've got to solve all those problems. Immigration is one of them. And doing nothing is not solving the problem. So it's frustrating to me that we haven't pushed forward on that issue. I think we should. I saw another hand at the same table. Yeah.
Advocates of the court, the biggest concern is the depth. The ship channel is not as deep as what other ports and ship channels in the rest of the country are, so that kind of limits protecting ships passing through the port and ship channel. Is the harbor fund, would that provide resources to deepen that?
The Port of Houston, portions of the Port of Houston are to be deepened. That is correct. Some places widened, but not completely widened. Harbor Maintenance Fund does not specifically go for dredge or go for making a port deeper or wider. It goes specifically for maintenance. So it's a separate piece of funding that comes out of the transportation bill. Okay, yes.
Candidates have talked about a flat tax. What do you think about that?
The question was about a flat tax. My opinion is that we should take the current income tax code and set it aside and come up with another system for taxing America. I'm in favor of the fair tax. What's the fair tax? The fair tax is a national sales tax concept. You do away with the income tax code, you really do away with the IRS completely, you know. And you come up with something, it's called the fair tax because everybody's taxed, whether whether you work on the cash economy or you don't, but everybody's taxed the same. And you set it up, you can set it up anyway. And I think it could be, Texas is a pretty good model. You know, we have exemptions under the fair tax in Texas. That's what we really have, the sales tax. And you could model it that way. It'd be simpler, be fair. And some economists say that we would bring in more revenue because of the cost of dealing with taxes is so high. You separate all that. So I'm for a fair tax. Flat tax would be, I'm for either one of those. But we're not going to have either one until the American public decide that they want something other than income tax. You know who fights changing the income tax code? Lobbyists. Lobbyists. That's true. Most people who are lobbyists come to Washington, they want a break for this specific entity. They want the tax code to be changed. So it'd be an uphill fight. But I'm for the fair tax, much better. We have the highest corporate income tax in the world. People ask, why are businesses moving offshore? To stay in business, that's why they're moving offshore. We ought to reduce the corporate income tax. We ought to drop it down to at least 25, maybe even less. That'll create jobs. Instead of paying taxes, businesses can hire folks. And once again, we're bringing as much, if not more, revenue, according to some experts. Yes?
What's the roadblock behind balanced budget?
Well, we have passed a balanced budget this year. You're talking about a balanced budget amendment? Okay. Roadblocks, it just hasn't gotten a lot of steam yet. I don't know why. I think we ought to, the state of Texas has to balance their budget. It's the law, We need a balanced budget amendment. $18 trillion in debt, that's a lot of money. I don't know how much, but it's a lot. It's 18 with a lot of zeros behind it. I'm in favor of the balanced budget amendment. Doesn't have the votes to pass yet. Yes, there's always a chance you can change the leadership. I don't think that this has anything to do with leadership, though. It's going to take both parties to pass a balanced budget amendment and get it through the states. So I think we ought to have a balanced budget. That's been around for many, many years. Yes?
Congressman, since you're both a lawyer and a judge, as well as a member of Congress, I'd kind of like to hear your legal and political opinion on Hillary's activities, email activities, legal and political ramifications in your opinion on that?
I'll send you an email over it. How's that sound? On my private server, yes. Okay, I shouldn't have said that. I know. It's gonna play out eventually, in the sense that there's several committees looking at this. Now the FBI is apparently looking at it as well. I don't know the end of the story, how it's going to play out, but it's very serious, I think, accusation. And it's based upon the fact that State Department officials are to use government email accounts for everything, and classified information, for example, got on her server. I don't know if it's there or not. They turned it over. We'll find out. But I don't think it's going to. I think it will hurt her politically if it gets any worse, and it already is. So.
But legally, if you can't say this for whatever reason, I understand. As someone who knows the law, do you feel that it seems like on the surface that she violated the law?
Well, I don't know if she did or not. I really don't. I know the accusations, but also I know what she says in her defense. And her defense, may be true or may not be true. Who knows? But the accusation is one that is very serious. And if it's true, it's a violation of federal law. So we'll find out. We'll all find out at the same time. But we have several committees looking into that. Yes?
Congressman, since we've downsized and moved out of the Middle East war, Iraq, Afghanistan, two things at the home front have been happening. Most people don't realize that our military has greatly been downsized. And so we're going to eventually deal with terrorism when we're losing our top brass in leadership. Is there a plan, is there conversations about how we're domestic terrorism going on. Our young people are being engaged through the internet through this ideology. So what's the plan to strengthen our military so that we can re-engage and fight a less conventional war and to build our numbers back? The military is greatly decreased since Iraq and Afghanistan.
The military is down to the size it was right after World War II, when we downsized after World War II. So it's very disturbing to me that we have done that. The first thing we have to do is eliminate the sequester dealing with the military, the Department of Defense. They need more funding across the board. And the military is getting smaller and smaller. I have a chart that I'll eventually post on my website of the size of China's military and the size of the United States. It's staggering, the difference, how large there is. And I'm not just talking about troops, I'm talking about planes and submarines and ships. We should not be downsizing our military, no question about it. Right now, we're just trying to keep it at where it is. I think the generals need to decide how we defeat ISIS. I don't think politicians ought to make that decision. But it's certainly a different type of threat to the United States, and we need to be, I think it's a national security threat. They're using social media to recruit people in the United States to do things in the United States. It's very appealing to some of those folks, and they have to be dealt with. But I think Congress recognizes, Republicans and Democrats, the need for more specific funding for our military. We just want to make sure that the administration has a plan to defeat ISIS. That's the first push. Let's have a plan. Yes? What about it? Well, the question was about the border. I've been down there a lot. I go down there, I mean, I almost got residency down there in McAllen, Texas, because I go down so often. But the border is not secure. It's worse than it ever has been. I was down there, the last time I was down there, I was with the Texas officials. And what has happened in Texas is that the state of Texas has taken over the responsibility of securing the border, portions of the southern border, because the federal government will not do it. And it's, you know, there's more funding, but the plan for securing the border is skewed because we don't really defend the border. Let me say it this way. You need people on the border to stop people from coming into the United States without permission. But we don't have people on the border. We have people behind the border. And, I mean, the Border Patrol does as good a job as they can. They really do. But there's not enough of them. So what they do, people cross into the United States. Once they are in the United States, then they have to be dealt with by us in the United States. Border Patrol tries to catch as many as they can and send a few of them back. We need to have a presence on the border. State of Texas did this. Did y'all reappropriate more funding for border security? $800 million. And what they have done, the state of Texas, is put the National Guard on the border, which is the shoreline, or in the water. In that area that's being patrolled by the state of Texas, people are not crossing into the United States. They don't come across. So they don't become an issue for us to deal with when you have border security. So we have to change our whole mentality about border security and not try to protect behind the border, but protect the border. And that's not really the answer to your question, but we're not doing that. The state of Texas is having to do that on their own because the federal government has not, will not do that. Plus you have the catch and release problem that we have. Lots of folks being released that shouldn't be released. People are not being sent back to their home country that are felons. For example, the law in the United States is if you commit a crime and you're from a foreign country, legal or illegal, if you commit a felony and you go to our prisons, as soon as you get out, you go back where you came from. You're supposed to be deported. So the system works. We order those people deported, but their country won't take them back. So what happens? Then they're released back into the United States because their country won't take them back. You know, I've introduced legislation to punish those countries by taking away their legal visas. They won't take their ex-cons back, then you're not going to let people come in to go to school in this country. So nothing is being done. Nothing any different than is being done. We've appropriated more money. The state of Texas is trying to do their job, but the border is worse than it ever has been. And people all over the world know if you want to come into the United States, get to Mexico, and you can come in there. And about half are from other countries other than Mexico. Mexico has the same problem we do. They don't secure their borders. They have two oceans, of course. So massive problem, and it's just being ignored. Part of part of our leadership should be, let's have a border security plan and deal with immigration. Those are different. Border security and immigration are entirely two different issues in my opinion. We're not dealing with either one of those. One more question. No more questions. Yes.
So we've been at war for a decade, well over a decade. We have
13 years.
thousands of veterans coming home, thousands of them. There was big news about the VA not taking care of those troops that were returning. They were on the wait list. I am one of those veterans. It took me 18 months to see the VA. The news came and it left. And here we still sit with more troops on their way home. What is happening to the VA? Where is the attention being given to take care of this experience and this knowledge that we have here for our veterans?
Well, my opinion is people in the Veterans Administration need to go to jail that are responsible for what has happened to our veterans. They need to be fired. They need to go to jail. That did not happen. And so what we have done in the House, we have passed legislation to have more accountability to the bureaucrats in the Veterans Administration. Passed right before we left session. But the answer is exactly right. Not much has changed. What we try to do in our office, and my caseworker that deals with veterans issues, Amy, she's an Iraqi veteran. We do a pretty good job. We do a real good job of getting our people who contact us, we get them into the Veterans Administration, case by case basis. But it shouldn't take really a member of Congress to get involved personally in everybody's case before the Veterans Administration sees them. They cooked the books about what was taking place. People literally died waiting to see a doctor. That is just awful. And the people that are responsible for cooking the books, they ought to be in jail. They ought to be fired. But it hadn't changed a great deal. And I think we have to have a change in leadership at the top of the VA to make sure that it takes place. My answer is this. Veterans that we've promised veterans we're going to take care of their medical needs. Then give them a voucher. Then they can go see any doctor or any hospital they want to, because we, the taxpayers, are going to pay for it. Let them go wherever they want to go. If they can't get in the VA, okay, they go wherever they want to go. Then they get to see a doctor on a timely basis. That really is the immediate answer, in my opinion, for veterans. Vouchers to see some other doctor. The VA does a pretty good job. Once you get in to see them, once you get in there, they do a pretty good job about it. But it is a bureaucratic nightmare and needs a complete overhaul. It needs to be run like a business, like one of our hospitals. Needs to take over the Veterans Administration, give them some examples on how to help our veterans. But that's right. Big news story, big flash, a lot was said, nothing was done, and here we are in the same situation. But that's the answer, in my opinion. Vouchers, and then change administration of the Veterans Administration. I know we have a lot of vets. Speaking of vets, and I'm going to give one more example, and then I'll be quiet. On Thursday night, is it Thursday night? I don't even know the date. I don't know what the date is. On August the 20th, we're going to have an honor our heroes, our veterans. It's at the Sosa Center over in Spring Branch. I represent all of Spring Branch, but it's centrally located in our district. And why August the 20th are you honoring veterans? Because nothing happens on August the 20th except honor our heroes. And it's not Memorial Day, it's not Veterans Day, it's August the 20th. And that's the day we've picked, our third year And we want veterans to show up. It's going to just be a big patriotic pep rally. It's going to be wonderful. The last two were great. If you're a veteran, come, wear your uniform if you can get in it. Or if you know a veteran, be there. Or if you just want to come. We're going to have several World War II folks being there. Sam Johnson, you may have never heard of Sam Johnson. Sam Johnson is a member of Congress, but before he was a member of Congress, he was a pilot in Korea. He did 62 missions in Korea. And then in Vietnam, he flew 25 missions, and he was shot down on his 25th mission. He was captured, and he was spent 7 years in prisoner of war camp, 4 years in solitary confinement. 4 years. And great guy. He's going to speak. It's Thursday night. Kim's got the flyer. Pick one up. Come by if you want to. It's free. It doesn't cost any money. And if you're a veteran, we really want you to come by, as we just honor our vets. It's a great experience. Okay, I appreciate you letting me stop by and talk so long. We have an office on Kingwood Drive. Stop in anytime. We do all the social media stuff, you know, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and all of those other things. So, but I really enjoy and appreciate the fact that I get to represent you all in Congress. And let me know what you think. Send me an email if you want to, and we will answer it on a government email server. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Small token of our appreciation. Thank you so much. You're always informative and you are so entertaining, so we greatly appreciate your time. So let's see, Heath, I think you're up for the 10K, 5K. Corey, you're up for the 10K, 5K. Okay.
I look like Heath, I know it. Nothing but good news. We're ahead of last year's pace, so we still need your help to get to 1,000, but we're approaching 700 right now. So if you haven't signed up for the 5K, 10K, grab a chamber member, staff member, grab myself. Please ask any questions you have. We'd love to get you signed up right away. You can sign up yourself at LakeHouston10K5K.com. We'll have fun for the kids. The best news is the weather is going to work out. So I've heard a lot of you on social media, it's too hot, it's too hot. It'll be about 77 roughly degrees Saturday morning. And Heath and I have been out there running the course since we can't run it on Saturday. And we want everyone to come out and have a good time. It's a great event. It's great to showcase our area to businesses and families who may not live in the Lake Houston area. So it's great for the chamber, it's great for our community, and it's great for you and your business. So come on out. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. So in closing, I want to really thank Insperity. I think Mark just slipped out for being our presenting sponsor today, and thank everyone for coming, and hope you have a great afternoon. Thank you.